the mist-laden depths of Blackwood Ridge, Ethan Carter was about to capture the rarest shot of his career. A routine hike for a struggling photographer turned into a descent into madness when he unearthed a buried relic beneath the gnarled roots of an ancient oak. Ethan Carter wasn't just another wildlife photographer. For 5 years, he had been an investigative journalist, known for unearthing stories others feared to touch. But after his fiancée, Samantha Quinn, vanished, while chasing a lead in these very woods, Ethan walked away from the job until now. When the relic pulsed to life beneath his fingers, he had no idea he was awakening something far older than civilization itself. The moment he touched it, time fractured, and he found himself staring into a vision, a city that shouldn't exist, a woman he lost, and a name whispered through the void: Vincent Holt. What began as a desperate attempt to document nature would become a battle against forces that had watched these woods for centuries. Blackwood Ridge and the world beyond would never be the same after Ethan Carter unlocked the first chronostone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches, you make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mist clung to Blackwood Ridge as Ethan Carter adjusted his camera settings. 5 years as a wildlife photographer had not erased his feeling of being an imposter. The press credentials that once opened doors for him as an investigative journalist now gathered dust in his apartment drawer. "Come on," he whispered, scanning the canopy for movement. "Where are you hiding?" The northern goshawk had been spotted in this region last week, a rare sighting that could fetch a decent sum. Ethan needed that money. His rent was overdue. He pushed deeper into the woods where the trees grew older, their branches forming cathedral-like arches overhead. The mist thickened around his ankles. A rational part of his mind suggested turning back. Navigating Blackwood Ridge after dark was foolish even for experienced hikers. But something pulled him forward, the same reckless curiosity that had once made him a promising journalist. The forest opened into a clearing dominated by a massive oak tree, its roots erupting from the earth like writhing serpents. Through his viewfinder, he noticed an unusual glint between the roots. Probably trash left by hikers, he thought. Crouching between two massive roots, he began to dig where the glint had caught his eye. Instead of an aluminum can or wrapper, his fingers brushed against something smooth and cold. As more dirt fell away, he uncovered a disc about the size of his palm. It was metallic, but unlike any metal he'd seen before, a material that shifted between silver and copper depending on how the light hit it. The surface was covered in intricate symbols that seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them. "What the hell are you?" he whispered, brushing away the last of the dirt. The moment his fingers made full contact with the disc's surface, it pulsed with a soft blue light. A jolt of energy shot up his arm. Then the world fractured. "Must not use it. The consequences." The voice sliced through his consciousness, female and urgent. The forest around him flickered like a faulty television signal, images overlapping. The clearing as it was now. The same clearing covered in snow. The clearing ablaze with autumn colors. The clearing with the oak a mere sapling, tearing through the fabric. A different voice now, male and terrified. Ethan stumbled backward, but instead of the forest floor, his foot found nothing. He was standing on the edge of a precipice looking out over a city he didn't recognize, buildings of impossible geometry stretching toward a sky with 2 moons. "Find me." This voice he knew. It struck him like a physical blow. "Sam," he choked out, and there she was, Samantha Quinn, standing in a stone chamber, her face illuminated by the same eerie blue light. Her dark hair was longer than when he'd last seen her. Her face thinner, but her eyes were the same. He'd spent 5 years trying to forget those eyes. She was looking right at him, her expression a mixture of shock and recognition. "Ethan?" Her lips formed his name, though the sound reached him as if through water. "How are you?" The vision shattered. Darkness rushed in like a tide. Ethan woke with a gasp, his face pressed against the damp earth. The disc lay beside him, now dark and dormant. Had he hallucinated the whole thing? But the memory of Samantha was too vivid, too real. 5 years since she'd vanished in these very woods, while investigating rumors of strange disappearances in Blackwood Ridge. 5 years of unanswered questions, of searching, of gradually accepting she was gone. 5 years of blaming himself for not stopping her from coming here alone. And now, a vision, or hallucination, of her looking directly at him, recognizing him. Ethan's hands trembled as he carefully picked up the disc. Nothing happened. It felt like ordinary metal now, though the strange symbols remained, catching what little moonlight filtered through the trees. He slipped the disc into his camera bag. Standing up, he reached for his flashlight, only to freeze at the sight before him. The ground around the tree was disturbed, not just where he had excavated the disc, but in a circular pattern surrounding the entire clearing. Footprints, dozens of them, forming concentric circles around where he had lain unconscious. Someone, or something, had been watching him, walking around him as he lay there, and judging by the depth and clarity of the prints in the soft soil, they had been there just moments before he awoke. Ethan's flashlight beam caught something else, a symbol carved freshly into the ancient oak's bark, the same as one of the markings on the disc. Beneath it, written in what looked disturbingly like blood, were 3 words: "Bring it back." The forest was no longer silent. From somewhere in the darkness beyond the clearing came the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and getting closer. Ethan didn't wait to see who or what was approaching. Grabbing his camera bag, he plunged into the forest away from the sound. The disc seemed to grow heavier with each step, as if reluctant to leave its resting place. As he ran, one thought hammered in his mind. Samantha was alive, and somehow, this strange artifact was the key to finding her. Ethan didn't stop running until he reached his truck. Only when he was inside with the engine running did he allow himself to look back at the dark tree line. Nothing moved in the shadows. The disc sat heavy in his camera bag. He reached over and unzipped the bag just enough to confirm it was still there. In the dim glow of the dashboard lights, the symbols seemed to shift and writhe across its surface. With trembling hands, he pulled out his phone and called his brother. The call went to voicemail. "Jax, it's Ethan. I found something in Blackwood Ridge. Something impossible. I think it might be connected to Sam's disappearance. Call me." He hung up, knowing how it would sound to his brother. Jax had spent years trying to help Ethan move on after Samantha vanished, had endured countless middle-of-the-night calls about new leads that led nowhere, had finally given up when Ethan refused to accept that sometimes people just disappeared without explanation. The truck's headlights cut through the darkness as Ethan pulled away from the trailhead. The apartment was silent and dark when Ethan returned. He flipped on the lights, revealing a space that barely qualified as lived in. A futon that doubled as a couch, a desk cluttered with camera equipment, walls bare except for a single photograph, Samantha laughing by a lakeside, her hair caught by the wind. He placed the disc on the kitchen counter and stared at it. In the harsh overhead light, it looked less mysterious, more like an unusual piece of art or a movie prop. Except for the vision. Except for the footprints. Except for the warning carved into the tree. Ethan rubbed his eyes, exhaustion suddenly catching up with him. He needed sleep, but his mind was racing too fast. Instead, he fired up his laptop and began searching for information on ancient artifacts and strange symbols. Hours passed. At 3:42 a.m., his search led him to an obscure academic journal article titled "Potential Evidence of Prehistorical Civilizations with Advanced Theoretical Physics Understanding." The author's name hit him like a physical blow: Dr. Lillian Graves. He'd interviewed Dr. Graves once years ago for a piece on archaeological anomalies. In the article's accompanying photographs, one image caught his attention: a stone tablet, covered in markings strikingly similar to those on the disc. According to the caption, The tablet had been found in an undisclosed location in the Appalachian Mountains and dated to approximately 10,000 BCE. The Appalachians extended into this region. Could the disk be connected to whatever civilization had created that tablet? He checked the date of the article, published just 6 months before Samantha disappeared, before she began investigating rumors of strange disappearances in Blackwood Ridge. This couldn't be a coincidence. Dawn was breaking when Ethan finally collapsed onto his futon, the disc locked in a fireproof safe he normally used for rare camera lenses. Despite his exhaustion, sleep eluded him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Samantha standing in that stone chamber, her lips forming his name. Find me. Ethan woke to pounding on his apartment door. A glance at his phone showed it was past noon and that he had 3 missed calls from Jax. The pounding continued. Ethan, open up, I know you're in there. Ethan staggered to the door and opened it to find Jax standing in the hallway, still in his park ranger uniform, his expression a mixture of concern and exasperation. What the hell kind of message was that? Jax demanded, pushing past Ethan into the apartment. Something impossible in Blackwood Ridge? Connected to Sam? He stopped short when he saw Ethan's appearance. Jesus, you look like hell. I saw her, Jax, Ethan said, moving to the safe. When I touched it, I saw Sam. She saw me too. Ethan. Jax's voice held a familiar note of pity. I know how it sounds, but I can prove it. Ethan keyed in the combination with fingers that still trembled slightly. I found something buried in the woods. When I touched it, the safe was empty. Ethan stared at the vacant space where the disc should have been. It's gone, he whispered. The disc is gone. His panicked search halted as he spotted something on his desk, an envelope that hadn't been there the night before. His name was written on it in elegant, flowing script. With a growing sense of dread, Ethan opened the envelope and withdrew. A single sheet of expensive-looking paper. The message was brief. Mr. Carter. What you have found belongs to us. It was never meant for human hands. Consider this a courtesy warning. Forget what you saw, what you experienced. Forget her. Some doors once opened cannot be closed again. For your own safety and hers, walk away. Ordo Tenebris. What is that? Jax asked, reading over Ethan's shoulder. Ordo Tenebris? What kind of name is that? I don't know, Ethan replied, a chill running through him. But they took the disc. They were in my apartment while I was sleeping. He turned to his brother, his eyes hard with newfound determination. And they know about Samantha. They know she's alive. Jax stared at him, the pity in his expression, giving way to alarm. Tell me everything, he said finally, from the beginning. As Ethan began his story, neither brother noticed the shadow that passed briefly across the apartment window, a dark figure watching from the fire escape. Then, disappearing silently into the midday sun, the hunt had begun. Dr. Lillian Graves, Jax read from the article on Ethan's laptop. You think she can help? I interviewed her years ago about archaeological anomalies. She recognized something in the photos I showed her, something that scared her. Ethan paced the apartment, still shaken by the theft of the disc. And now this article with symbols like the ones on the artifact. And you're sure this Ordo Tenebris took it? Jax studied the note again. They were in my apartment while I was sleeping. And they know about Samantha. After a brief argument, Jax reluctantly agreed to accompany Ethan to the university, where Dr. Graves taught. But we're just asking questions, he insisted. Nothing reckless. The Department of Historical Linguistics occupied the 3rd floor of an older building, its hallways dim and lined with glass cases displaying fragments of ancient texts. Dr. Graves's office door was open. Through the gap, Ethan saw her bent over her desk, gray-streaked hair falling forward as she examined something through a magnifying glass. He knocked softly. Dr. Graves? She looked up, her sharp eyes narrowing behind rimless glasses. At 55, Lillian Graves hadn't lost the intensity that had made her both respected and feared in academic circles. "Office hours are for students, Mr. Carter. Ethan Carter. We met before. I interviewed you for the Chronicle about 6 years ago." Recognition dawned in her eyes, followed by wariness. "The journalist. Though I hear you've moved on to photographing birds these days." Word gets around. Her gaze shifted to Jax, who hung back at the doorway. "And your companion?" "My brother, Jonas Carter." Ethan stepped into the office and closed the door. "I need your help identifying something I found in Blackwood Ridge." Her posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Blackwood Ridge," she repeated. "Interesting choice for wildlife photography." "I wasn't photographing wildlife when I found it." Ethan described the disc in detail, its changing metallic surface, the swirling symbols, the energy that had pulsed from it when he touched it. "And then I saw things, heard voices, including Samantha Quinn, my fiancée who disappeared in those same woods 5 years ago." Dr. Graves remained silent for a long moment after he finished explaining about the theft and the note from Ordo Tenebris. "Where exactly did you find this disc?" she finally asked. "Under a massive oak tree in a clearing." "The guardian oak," she whispered, almost to herself. "A massive old tree, its roots exposed like they're trying to grab something." Ethan exchanged glances with Jax. "How did you know that?" Instead of answering, Dr. Graves turned to one of her bookshelves and pulled a leather-bound volume. She opened it to a page marked with a faded ribbon. On the yellowed page was a detailed drawing of a disc identical to the one Ethan had found. "This is what you saw, isn't it?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Ethan stared at the drawing, in shock. "Exactly like it. What is it?" "A chronostone." Dr. Graves closed the book carefully. "A relic of a civilization that understood time in ways we can barely comprehend. They could perceive it, manipulate it, even traverse it under certain circumstances." "Time travel?" Jax asked skeptically. "Not travel in the crude physical sense," Dr. Graves corrected, "but consciousness can perceive events outside its temporal frame, past, future, even alternate timelines." "How do you know this?" Ethan pressed. Dr. Graves sighed. "I was part of a government project, the Threshold Initiative. We studied artifacts with unusual properties. It was meant to be academic, but when certain people realized the potential applications, the project's focus changed. I left." "And my vision of Samantha?" Ethan asked. "Was it real? If she somehow encountered another chronostone, then she may indeed be trapped in a different temporal state." Hope bloomed in Ethan's chest. "Then I can find her." "It's not that simple," Dr. Graves warned. "These artifacts are unpredictable, dangerous, and they attract dangerous people." "Ordo Tenebris," Ethan said. She nodded grimly. "They've sought these artifacts for centuries, believing the chronostones are key to reshaping reality itself. And now they have the disc," Jax said. "They were in Ethan's apartment. They're probably watching us right now." "Almost certainly." Dr. Graves moved to the window and closed the blinds. "The chronostone has been dormant for centuries. The moment you activated it, you sent out a signal like a beacon." She withdrew a small electronic device from her desk drawer. "This is a temporal resonance detector, technology developed by the Threshold Initiative." She activated the device and directed it toward Ethan. It immediately emitted a high-pitched tone, a small display lighting up with fluctuating readings. "As I suspected," she said, "you're still carrying a temporal signature from your contact with the chronostone. It's faint but detectable." "What does that mean?" Ethan asked. "It means you're still connected to it even though it's physically gone, and through it potentially connected to Samantha." "And Ordo Tenebris knows this?" Jax asked. "They need him," Dr. Graves confirmed. "The prime chronostone can only be fully activated by someone with the right resonance. They'll be watching, waiting for an opportunity to use him." "We should go," Jax said abruptly. "We've been here too long already." Dr. Graves nodded in agreement. My knowledge makes me a person of interest to Ordo Tenebris as well. She quickly gathered a few items, the book containing the chronostone drawing, a small leather case, and a worn notebook. We'll take the service stairs. There's a maintenance tunnel that connects to the science building. As they prepared to leave, Ethan noticed her glancing nervously at the window. Dr. Graves, who exactly are these people? Ordo Tenebris believes they are descendants of the same civilization that created the chronostones, she explained, leading them toward a door at the back of her office. They've been manipulating events for centuries, trying to find the lost artifacts of their ancestors. And their leader, a man named Vincent Holt, is particularly obsessed with the prime chronostone. Why that one specifically? Because it controls all others. She opened the door, revealing a narrow stairwell. And if I'm right, Mr. Carter, the fact that it responded to you makes you very valuable to them, and very much in danger. As if on cue, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the main hallway outside her office. Move, she whispered urgently. And whatever you do, don't let them take you. They hurried down the service stairs, the footsteps growing louder behind them. At the bottom, Dr. Graves led them through a door marked Maintenance Only, into a dimly lit tunnel. They had gone perhaps 100 yards when Ethan felt a sudden pressure building in his skull. The tunnel walls seemed to waver at the edges of his vision. Dr. Graves, he called, his voice strained. Something's wrong. She turned back, her expression shifting from urgency to concern. Mr. Carter, what is it? I think it's reacting to something. The pressure intensified, a high-pitched whine filling his ears. The concrete walls became translucent at the edges of his vision. It's happening again. Jax grabbed his arm. Ethan, stay with us, brother. But his voice was already growing distant, as if he were speaking from the bottom of a well. The tunnel around them flickered, overlapping with another space entirely. I can't, Ethan gasped, and then the world dissolved. He found himself standing in his old apartment, the one he'd shared with Samantha before she disappeared, the night before she left for Blackwood Ridge. He watched, helpless, as his past self argued with her about going alone. You're going alone? That's insane, Sam. It's not insane, it's journalism, she replied, filling a thermos with coffee. The sources won't talk if I bring anyone else. Present Ethan stood frozen, watching the argument unfold exactly as he remembered it. He had relived this moment 1,000 times in his mind, imagining all the things he should have said to stop her. Sam, he whispered, though he knew she couldn't hear him. Don't go to Blackwood Ridge. There's something there. Something dangerous. Past Ethan continued arguing, unaware of the intrusion. At least tell me exactly where you're meeting these sources so I'll know where to look if what? Samantha snapped. If I don't come back? Jesus, Ethan, it's an interview in the woods, not a war zone. Present Ethan stepped between them, desperate. Sam, listen to me. You're going to disappear. 5 years, Sam. 5 years I've been looking. For you. Samantha's gaze drifted past Ethan, almost as if she were looking directly at her future fiancé. Her expression changed, softening with confusion. Did you hear something? She asked. Past Ethan glanced over his shoulder. No. What? I thought I heard. She shook her head. Never mind, just my nerves, I guess. Sam, the guardian oak, Ethan said urgently. Don't go near it, there's something buried beneath it, a disc, a relic, it's what's causing the disappearances. Samantha froze. The guardian oak, she repeated softly. Past Ethan tilted his head. What did you say? My source mentioned a landmark, a massive old oak tree where people have reported strange phenomena. The guardian oak, they called it. She looked thoughtful. I didn't tell you about that. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. Present Ethan saw a name that made his blood run cold. Dr. L. Graves. You knew her, he whispered. You were already talking to Lillian. The apartment began to waver. For one perfect moment, Samantha's eyes seemed to focus directly on him, widening with shock and recognition. Ethan? She whispered. How are you? The apartment collapsed into darkness. Ethan? Can you hear me? Lillian Graves's voice penetrated the fog in his mind. Ethan gasped, sucking in air as if he'd been underwater. He was lying on cold concrete, the tunnel's ceiling spinning above him. What happened? Jax demanded. He just collapsed. Not collapsed, disappeared, Dr. Graves corrected. For almost 2 minutes, you weren't physically present, Mr. Carter. Where did you go? Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My apartment with Samantha, the night before she disappeared. Ethan pushed himself to a sitting position. She heard me, Dr. Graves. She responded to what I said. He grabbed her arm. And she knew you. She had your name in her contacts. The color drained from Dr. Graves's face. That's not possible. I never met Samantha Quinn. Then why did she have your number? Before Dr. Graves could answer, a loud metallic bang echoed through the tunnel, the access door being forced open. We need to move, Jax ordered, helping Ethan to his feet. Can you walk? I'm okay. They hurried forward. As they emerged into a service area of the science building, Jax suddenly caught Ethan's arm. Your hand, he whispered. Ethan glanced down and felt a chill run through him. His right hand, the one that had first touched the chronostone, was shimmering slightly, becoming translucent at the edges. What's happening to me? He whispered. The chronostone is affecting your physical form, Dr. Graves replied. Your connection to this timeline is weakening. Am I disappearing like Samantha did? Your connection to the stone is growing stronger, and that makes you an even more valuable target. She nodded toward a door marked Exit. We need to get somewhere safe where I can tell you what I know about your fiancé. The admission hung in the air. Dr. Graves knew something about Samantha, something she hadn't been willing to share until now. A commotion behind them silenced further argument. Men's voices barking orders. Ordo Tenebris was closing in. They hurried to the parking garage, Dr. Graves leading the way to a modest gray sedan. As they pulled out, Ethan caught a glimpse of men in dark suits entering from another access point. Down, Dr. Graves hissed. They ducked as she drove past the men searching for them. They've seen us, Ethan warned as he noticed one of the men staring directly at their car. Dr. Graves accelerated, tires squealing. Behind them, 3 black SUVs pulled out of the parking garage, their pursuit methodical and unhurried. Give me directions to your brother's cabin, she said tersely to Jax. And prepare yourself, Mr. Carter, for the truth about your fiancé, and for what the chronostone is doing to you. As they sped away from the university, Ethan looked down at his still shimmering hand and wondered how much of himself would remain by the time they reached safety. Dusk settled over the mountains as Dr. Graves's sedan wound along narrow roads. They had evaded their pursuers through a series of abrupt turns onto unmarked forest paths that Jax directed them through. It's just ahead, Jax said, pointing to a clearing barely visible among the dense pines. The cabin materialized out of the gathering darkness, a sturdy structure of logs and stone. Jax circled the perimeter before letting them inside. Old combat, habits evident in his movements. Ethan sat heavily in a chair near the fire, examining his right hand. The translucency had spread past his wrist now, his forearm occasionally becoming transparent enough to see the chair arm through it. Dr. Graves set her leather case on the table and opened it, revealing specialized equipment. She ran a handheld scanner over Ethan's arm, frowning at the readings. The temporal displacement is accelerating. From her case, she withdrew a small metallic bracelet etched with familiar symbols. This is a temporal stabilizer, not as powerful as a chronostone, but it might slow the process. She fastened it around Ethan's flickering wrist. The effect was immediate but limited. His arm solidified, though a faint shimmer remained at the edges. Better, Ethan said, flexing his fingers. But I can still feel it, like I'm being pulled in different directions. The stabilizer buys us time, nothing more. Dr. Graves sat across from him. Now, I believe I owe you some explanations. Jax took a position by the window, dividing his attention between the forest outside and the conversation. Start with how you knew Samantha. When you claim never to have met her, Dr. Graves clasped her hands. I never did meet Samantha Quinn in person, but she contacted me about 6 months before her disappearance. She'd found references to temporal anomalies in Blackwood Ridge while researching local disappearances. Why didn't you tell me this before? Ethan demanded. Because there was nothing to tell. We exchanged a few emails. I warned her away from the area. She thanked me and said she was dropping the investigation. Dr. Graves's expression hardened. Obviously, she lied. So she was looking for the chronostone, Ethan said. And she found it just like I did. I believe so, yes. Dr. Graves turned to her case again, removing the leather-bound book. But there's more you need to know about the chronostones and why Ordo Tenebris wants you specifically. She opened the book to reveal illustrations of 3 distinct chronostones, blue, red, and green, arranged in a triangular formation. The triad, she explained. 3 chronostones, each with a different function designed to work in concert. The one I found was blue, Ethan observed. Yes, the prime chronostone, the key, the activator. The red is the stabilizer stone, allowing controlled navigation of temporal currents. The green is the guide stone, revealing paths through time's fabric. She turned the page to show the 3 stones combined into a single luminous entity. Together they form the unified stone, a device with the power to reshape reality itself. And Ordo Tenebris wants this power, Jack stated. They believe it's their birthright. Their leader, Vincent Holt, claims direct lineage from the civilization that created the chronostones, beings who called themselves the predecessors. What happened to them? Ethan asked. They destroyed themselves. Their manipulation of time created cascading paradoxes that fractured their reality. Dr. Graves closed the book. The chronostones were designed as a failsafe, a way to reset time to before the critical errors occurred. A time machine, Jack said skeptically. More like a reality editor. The unified stone doesn't just turn back the clock, it rewrites the timeline entirely, erasing the old and creating a new version where certain events never occurred. And Ordo Tenebris wants to use this to, what, become rulers of this new timeline? Ethan asked. Essentially, yes. But they need all 3 stones, and more importantly, they need someone with the right genetic makeup to activate them. Someone like me, Ethan concluded. Precisely. The predecessors engineered specific genetic markers into certain human bloodlines, fail-safes that would eventually produce individuals capable of operating their technology. She studied Ethan with new intensity. Your temporal sensitivity suggests you carry those markers. So they need me alive, Ethan said. That's why they didn't just kill me and take the chronostone. For now, yes. But once they have all 3 stones, they need only a small sample of your genetic material. Dr. Graves didn't need to elaborate on what that meant for Ethan's long-term survival. Jax moved from the window, his expression grim. You mentioned Samantha experienced the same thing as Ethan. Does that mean she's also a carrier? Yes. It's extraordinarily rare to find 2 carriers who know each other, let alone who are engaged. That can't be coincidence, Ethan said. It's not. Forces beyond your awareness may have been guiding events long before either of you found a chronostone. The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Ethan finally spoke. If Samantha found a chronostone too, where is she now? Is she trapped in time somehow? I believe so. Her consciousness may be adrift in the temporal stream, or anchored to a specific moment. Dr. Graves leaned forward. And your connection to her might be why you're experiencing such strong displacement effects. Hope flared in Ethan's chest. Then I can find her. If I can control these displacements, I can look for her through time. It's possible, but incredibly dangerous. Without proper stabilization, you risk becoming completely untethered, lost between moments with no way back. I don't care, Ethan said firmly. I've Spent 5 years searching for her. If there's any chance... A sudden wave of dizziness interrupted him. The cabin walls began to waver, becoming translucent around the edges of his vision. "It's happening again," he gasped. The room flickered around Ethan, overlapping with other places. His apartment, the forest clearing, locations he didn't recognize. Then everything dissolved into blinding light. When his vision cleared, Ethan found himself standing on a city street he didn't recognize. The architecture was strange. Buildings with impossible angles and materials that seemed to shift its colors. The sky above held 2 moons. People moved around him, tall, thin beings with elongated craniums and 6-fingered hands. The predecessors, going about their daily lives, completely unaware of him. "Extraordinary, isn't it?" came a voice beside him. "Their civilization at its height before the temporal wars began." Ethan turned to find a man standing next to him, tall, distinguished, with silver at his temples and eyes that seemed too old for his face. Despite the strange surroundings, he wore a perfectly tailored modern suit. "Vincent Holt," the man said with a slight bow. "Current leader of Ordo Tenebris, though we've had many names throughout history." He gestured to the alien city around them. "And this is Kronos Prime, temporal nexus point of the predecessor civilization. Approximately 30,000 years before your birth. How are you here? How am I here? We're not physically. Our consciousness is viewing this moment through the temporal aperture created by the prime chronostone." Holt smiled thinly. "My people have practiced this form of temporal observation for millennia. What do you want from me?" "Currently, just conversation. A chance to explain what Dr. Graves undoubtedly portrayed as villainous ambition." Holt walked casually forward, and Ethan found himself compelled to follow. "She told you we want to rewrite reality, yes? To place ourselves as rulers of a new timeline?" "Something like that. A simplification. We seek to restore, not conquer." Holt gestured to the magnificent city around them. "This is humanity's birthright, not the primitive struggle you call civilization. The predecessors weren't alien beings. They were humans who had evolved beyond your current limitations. Our ancestors. If they were so advanced, why did they destroy themselves? A faction arose that feared change that clung to the past. They sabotaged experiments, scattered the chronostones across time, and engineered a temporal cataclysm rather than allow progress." Holt's expression darkened. "Sound familiar? Perhaps like a certain Dr. Graves and her custodians?" Ethan's mind reeled. Custodians? She never mentioned. Of course not. The custodians of time have hidden their true nature for centuries, posing as academics, archaeologists, priests, anything to maintain their vigil over the chronostones. And Samantha? Where does she fit in all this? "Ah, the missing fiancée." Holt's expression softened with what appeared to be genuine sympathy. "She found a chronostone just as you did, but without guidance, without understanding what was happening to her, she became lost in the temporal currents. Can you find her?" "With the prime chronostone, yes. Her consciousness would be drawn to its resonance just as yours is." Holt turned to face Ethan directly. "Help me recover it, Mr. Carter, and I promise you'll see her again." Before Ethan could respond, the city around them flickered. Skyscrapers crumbled in an eye blink, replaced by ruins. The sky darkened, the twin moons replaced by unfamiliar constellations. "Our connection is weakening," Holt observed. "Your physical anchor in the present is reasserting itself." The ruins continued their accelerated decay until nothing remained but wilderness. Then that too faded, the entire vision collapsing into darkness. Ethan, can you hear me?" He gasped back to consciousness, finding himself on the cabin floor. Jax knelt beside him, his expression taut with worry. Dr. Graves stood a few paces back, her scanner in hand. "I saw the predecessor city," Ethan said, sitting up slowly, "and I met Vincent Holt." The color drained from Dr. Graves's face. "What did he tell you?" "That you're a custodian. That your people destroyed the predecessor civilization because you feared change. That you've been lying to me." Ethan stood shakily. "Is it true?" Dr. Graves's shoulders slumped slightly. "Not as he presented it, no. But yes, I am a custodian of time. My order has guarded the chronostones for millennia, preventing what would be the greatest catastrophe in human history." "The restoration of an advanced civilization?" Ethan challenged. "The erasure of everything we are, everything we've built, everyone who has ever lived," she countered. "The predecessors didn't want to restore humanity, Mr. Carter. They wanted to overwrite us to replace our timeline with their own." "Why should I believe you over him?" "Because I'm trying to save your world. He's trying to destroy it and replace it with a fantasy." She set down the scanner. "And because he's already lying to you about the one thing you care most about, Samantha." Ethan's anger faltered. "What do you mean?" "Vincent Holt doesn't want to help you find her. He's the one who took her in the first place." Dr. Graves's eyes held a terrible certainty. 5 years ago, Samantha Quinn discovered evidence of Ordo Tenebris's activities in Blackwood Ridge. She was getting too close to the truth, so they used the chronostone to remove her from the timeline. Why didn't they just kill her? Because they discovered she was a carrier, genetically compatible with the chronostones. Too valuable to eliminate, too dangerous to leave in place. Dr. Graves approached Ethan cautiously. "They've been holding her in temporal stasis, Mr. Carter, a bargaining chip to use when they found the prime chronostone, which they now have," Ethan said softly. "So they don't need her anymore." The cabin fell silent except for the crackling fire. Outside, the wind had picked up, branches scraping against the roof like skeletal fingers. "So what do we do?" Ethan finally asked, his anger giving way to grim determination. "How do we stop them? We find the prime chronostone before they can combine it with the others," Dr. Graves replied. "Your connection to it works both ways. It pulls on you, but you can also sense its location." "How?" "By using your temporal displacement actively, rather than passively." Jax, who had been silent during this exchange, suddenly raised a hand for quiet. "We've got company," he whispered, peering through a gap in the curtains. "Vehicles on the access road, at least 3. Ordo Tenebris," Dr. Graves confirmed grimly. "They've found us." "How?" Ethan asked. "We lost them hours ago." "They didn't track the car," Dr. Graves said, her eyes falling on Ethan's shimmering form. "They tracked you. Your temporal signature is getting stronger, like a beacon calling out across time itself." Jax moved quickly to a cabinet and withdrew 2 handguns, offering one to Dr. Graves. She accepted it with practiced ease that suggested this wasn't her first confrontation with Ordo Tenebris. "If Ordo Tenebris is here, they've brought the prime chronostone with them," Dr. Graves said. "This may be our best chance to recover it." "How?" Ethan asked. "By using your connection to pull it to you, rather than it pulling you to it." She adjusted the stabilizer bracelet. "Focus on the chronostone. Visualize it coming to you." Headlights swept across the cabin windows as vehicles approached. Time was running out. "I'll try," Ethan agreed, closing his eyes. He focused on the blue disk, remembering its weight, its texture, the symbols that flowed across its surface like liquid. The stabilizer bracelet grew warm against his skin. His body began to shimmer more intensely, but this time, it didn't feel like he was fading away. Instead, it felt like he was pulling something toward him through the fabric of reality itself. Outside, someone shouted in alarm. A strange, high-pitched whine built in the air around them. "It's working," Dr. Graves whispered, staring at her scanner. "The chronostone is responding." The cabin door burst open, Ordo Tenebris agents rushing in with weapons drawn. At the same moment, a blinding flash of blue light erupted in the center of the room. When it faded, the prime chronostone hovered in the air before Ethan, pulsing with power. For a moment, everyone froze. Jax and Dr. Graves with weapons raised, the Ordo Tenebris agents in mid-charge, and Ethan, his hand outstretched toward the floating chronostone. Then time itself seemed to fracture. Time fractured. The cabin and everyone in it seemed to freeze for an impossible moment. Ordo Tenebris agents in mid-lunge, Jax with his weapon half raised, Dr. Graves reaching for the chronostone. Then reality shattered like glass. The walls of the cabin dissolved, replaced by a kaleidoscopic swirl of locations and times. Ethan, Jax, and Dr. Graves remained solid, while everything around them fluctuated wildly. "The chronostone!" Dr. Graves shouted over the cacophony of disjointed sounds. "It's creating a temporal displacement field." The prime chronostone hovered before Ethan, pulsing with intensifying blue light. Ethan lunged forward and seized it. The moment his fingers closed, around it, a shockwave of energy exploded outward. The chaos stopped abruptly, resolving into a single location: the forest of Blackwood Ridge under a full moon. "Where are we?" Jax asked, weapon still raised, scanning the moonlit trees. "When is the better question?" Dr. Graves replied, checking her scanner. "The chronostone transported us physically this time, not just mentally." "Back to where I found it," Ethan said, recognizing the path that led to the Guardian Oak's clearing. The chronostone felt warm in his hand, its symbols pulsing with steady blue light. His body had fully solidified, the temporal stabilizer bracelet now dark and inert. "The connection has been restored," Dr. Graves observed. "The prime chronostone recognizes you as its carrier." "What about Ordo Tenebris?" Jax asked, still watchful. "Scattered through the temporal displacement, but not for long. We've got maybe 10 minutes before they recalibrate and follow our temporal signature." "Then we need to move," Jax said. "But where?" "Away from here," Ethan decided, pocketing the chronostone. "They'll expect us to head for the Guardian Oak." They set off through the forest, moving quickly but quietly. Jax took point, his military training evident in his movements. "Why did the chronostone bring us here?" Ethan asked as they hiked. "It responded to your unconscious desires," Dr. Graves explained. "You associate Blackwood Ridge with Samantha's disappearance." A sharp crack interrupted her, a branch breaking under someone's weight. All three froze, listening. The forest had gone unnaturally silent. "They're here," Jax whispered, motioning them behind a large boulder. They crouched in the shadows as figures in black tactical gear emerged from the trees, moving with precision through the forest. "They're tracking the chronostone," Dr. Graves whispered. "Its energy signature leaves a trail through time." "What do we do?" Ethan asked. "We need to mask the signature." She pulled a small device from her pocket. "This temporal dampener might help, but it has limited range." As if to confirm their danger, the forest around them flickered briefly, trees disappearing and reappearing, the ground itself shifting beneath their feet. For a moment, they glimpsed other versions of the same location, the forest in different seasons, different eras. "The chronostone is bleeding temporal energy," Dr. Graves explained, creating overlaps between different time periods. Another temporal flicker rippled through the forest. When it passed, one of the Ordo Tenebris agents stood barely 20 feet away, his back to them. He hadn't been there seconds ago. Jax raised his weapon, but Dr. Graves placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Don't. Gunfire will draw the others." Too late. The agent turned, spotted them, and reached for his radio. Jax lunged forward and tackled him silently to the ground, rendering him unconscious with a practiced chokehold. "We need to move," he said, dragging the body behind the boulder. They set off at a run, no longer concerned with stealth. Behind them, shouts erupted as the agent was discovered. The forest continued to shift around them as they fled, trees appearing and disappearing, the terrain itself changing unpredictably. At one point, they found themselves running alongside a herd of prehistoric mammals that materialized for a few seconds, before vanishing again. "The temporal distortions are getting worse," Dr. Graves panted. The ground ahead of them dropped, away suddenly, a ravine that hadn't been there moments before. They skidded to a halt at the edge, nearly falling into the abyss. "This wasn't here," Jax insisted, staring down into the darkness. "It exists, just not in our time," Dr. Graves explained. We're seeing temporal overlays from different eras. How do we cross it? Ethan asked. Another shout from behind answered the question for them. The Ordo Tenebris agents were closing in. We go down, Jax decided, pointing to a narrow path, descending the ravine wall. They scrambled down the steep path, loose rocks clattering dangerously beneath their feet. The ravine itself flickered as they descended, sometimes appearing as a dried riverbed, sometimes as a flowing river, sometimes as something else entirely. At the bottom, they paused to catch their breath. Above them, flashlight beams cut through the darkness as their pursuers reached the ravine's edge. They're following, Jax observed grimly. Of course they are, came a voice from the shadows. They've been following you across time itself. All three spun toward the voice, Jax raising his weapon. From the darkness emerged a tall, distinguished man with silver at his temples. Ethan recognized him immediately from his temporal vision. Vincent Holt, he said. Holt smiled, stepping into the moonlight. Mr. Carter, Dr. Graves, and you must be Jonas Carter, the protective older brother. He spread his hands to show he was unarmed. A pleasure to meet you all properly. How are you here? Dr. Graves demanded. I'm in many places at once, Doctor. A benefit of long exposure to the chronostones. Holt's gaze fixed on Ethan. I see you've reclaimed the prime chronostone. Impressive. Your affinity exceeds even my expectations. Stay back, Jax warned, his gun trained on Holt's chest. Holt chuckled. That won't be necessary, Mr. Carter. I'm not here to fight, merely to talk. He snapped his fingers and the figures above retreated from view. There, now we can speak civilized. What do you want? Ethan asked, the chronostone pulsing faster in his pocket. The same thing you want, Mr. Carter. Resolution, an end to the temporal fracturing that threatens to tear reality apart. Holt stepped closer. Dr. Graves has undoubtedly told you that I wish to use the triad to replace our timeline with the predecessors. What she hasn't told you is that without intervention, there won't be a timeline left to save. The ravine around them flickered again, more violently this time. For several seconds, they found themselves standing not in a ravine, but in a bustling city street from what appeared to be the early 1900s. Pedestrians walked past, oblivious to the four people suddenly standing among them. Then the city vanished, replaced once more by the ravine. You see? Holt gestured to where the vision had been. Reality is becoming unstable. Time itself is fraying at the edges. Without the triad's activation, the fracturing will continue until all of history collapses into chaos. And your solution is to erase our timeline and replace it with your version? Jax asked skeptically. My solution is to stabilize reality before it's too late. Holt's expression hardened. The predecessors understood that sometimes to save the patient you must amputate the limb. And we're the limb, Dr. Graves countered. Billions of lives, erased to satisfy your God complex. And Samantha? Ethan asked. Where does she fit in all this? Yes, your missing fiancée. Holt's expression softened. She's trapped, Mr. Carter. Caught between moments when she encountered a chronostone 5 years ago, I can show you. He extended his hand, palm up. In it rested a small red disc, the stabilizer stone. This will allow us to find her across time's barriers. Don't, Dr. Graves warned. It's a trick. Ask yourself why the good doctor never mentioned Samantha might be saved, Holt challenged. Why she focused only on securing the chronostone, never on using it to find the woman. You love. Show me, Ethan said finally. Ethan, no, Dr. Graves protested. I need to know. Ethan stepped toward Holt. Show me Samantha. Ethan reached for the red disc, the prime chronostone pulsing frantically in his pocket. The moment his fingers made contact with the stabilizer stone, the world dissolved around him. He found himself standing in a void of swirling temporal energy. And there, suspended in the chaos, was Samantha. She appeared exactly as she had the day she disappeared, frozen in a moment of discovery, her hand outstretched towards something Ethan couldn't see. Her expression was one of wonder and fear, caught in the instant before temporal displacement claimed her. "Sam," he whispered, reaching for her. His touch met an invisible barrier. Her form flickered slightly at the contact, her eyes momentarily focusing on him before returning to their fixed stare. "She's trapped in an isolated temporal pocket." Holt's voice came from behind him, experiencing the same moment over and over. "Can she be freed?" Ethan asked, his hand still pressed against the barrier. "With the triad, yes. The unified stone can restore her to the normal flow of time." Holt stepped beside him. "But the custodians would rather leave her trapped than risk their precious timeline." "That's not true," Dr. Graves's voice interjected. She and Jax had appeared in the void as well, though they seemed less substantial than Ethan and Holt. "We've been searching for ways to rescue temporal exiles without destabilizing reality." "A choice I'd make in a heartbeat for Samantha," Ethan said, his eyes never leaving her suspended form. "Would she want that?" Dr. Graves asked gently. "Would Samantha Quinn, the journalist who risked her life seeking truth, want to exist in a reality built on the erasure of everyone she ever knew?" Before Ethan could respond, the void shattered. He found himself back in the ravine, on his knees, the red stabilizer stone still in his hand alongside the blue prime chronostone. Jax and Dr. Graves stood nearby looking disoriented, but Vincent Holt was nowhere to be seen. "Where did he go?" Ethan asked, rising shakily to his feet. A slow hand clap answered him. They turned to see Holt standing atop the ravine, silhouetted against the night sky. "Bravo, Mr. Carter. You've just provided exactly what I needed. Direct synchronization between two of the triad stones." "What are you talking about?" Ethan shouted up at him. "The chronostones remember each other. Once connected, they can find each other across time and space." Holt's smile was visible even at a distance. "And now, thanks to you, I know exactly where to find the final piece. The guide stone." "He used us," Dr. Graves realized. "The entire confrontation was staged to get you to activate both stones simultaneously." Before they could respond, the ravine began to shift around them again, but more violently than before. The ground buckled and heaved, trees appearing and disappearing, rapidly buildings rising and collapsing in eye blinks. "Time is fracturing," Dr. Graves shouted over the growing cacophony. "The synchronization is accelerating the process." Holt gave a mocking salute from the ravine's edge. "I'd suggest running, Mr. Carter. The temporal collapse will begin here and spread outward. You have perhaps 20 minutes before this entire area is erased from reality." With that, he turned and vanished into the darkness. "We need to move," Jax urged, grabbing Ethan's arm. "Now!" They scrambled up the ravine wall as reality continued to disintegrate around them. Temporal overlays flashed by at increasing speed. Prehistoric, landscapes, future cityscapes, versions of Blackwood Ridge from different eras. With each shift, the transitions became more violent. "We'll never outrun it," Dr. Graves gasped as they reached the top. "The fracturing is spreading too quickly." "Then we don't run," Ethan decided, pulling out both chronostones. "We use these." "To do what?" "To find the third stone before Holt does." Ethan held up the artifacts, which were now pulsing in perfect synchronization. "If these two can locate the third, maybe they can take us directly to it." "That's insanely dangerous," Dr. Graves protested. "Without proper control, you could end up anywhere in time, or lost between times entirely." "We don't have a choice," Jax said, watching as trees behind them began to dissolve into temporal static. Ethan closed his hands around both chronostones, feeling their energies resonate through him. "Focus on the third stone," he said, remembering what Dr. Graves had taught him. "Visualize it finding its companions." The chronostones pulsing accelerated, their blue and red lights blending into a purple glow that enveloped all three of them. The forest around them faded, replaced by the void of swirling temporal energy. "It's working," Dr. Graves exclaimed. "The stones are creating a temporal corridor." In the distance, a green light pulsed like a beacon. The third chronostone, the guide stone, calling to its counterparts. "There," Ethan said, somehow directing their movement through the void toward the light. "That's where we need to go." As they approached the green glow, a figure became visible, an elderly man in clerical attire holding the guide stone in his palms. He looked up at their approach, not with surprise but with recognition. "Ethan Carter," the man said, his voice resonating through the void. "At last you have arrived. I am Father Elias Murray, and I've been waiting for you for a very long time." Before Ethan could respond, the void collapsed around them. The last thing he saw was Father Moray's serene smile before the world dissolved once more into blinding light. The blinding light faded, and Ethan found himself standing in a small stone church. Moonlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting colored patterns across worn wooden pews. Outside the windows, the sky swirled with unnatural colors, and the landscape appeared barren and distorted. Father Moray stood before them, the green guide stone glowing softly in his palm. He was tall and elderly, his face deeply lined but his eyes sharp and alert. "Welcome, travelers," he said, his voice resonant in the quiet sanctuary. "You've come a long way through difficult currents." "Where are we?" Jax asked, weapon still half raised, scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. "A place of sanctuary," Father Moray replied. "A pocket of stability in the borderlands." "The borderlands," Ethan repeated. "The space between established timelines," Dr. Graves explained. "Neither past nor present nor future, but a liminal space where all times potentially exist." "You know much, Lillian Graves," Father Moray observed with a small nod. "As befits a custodian of your rank." Ethan glanced between them. "You two know each other?" "We've never met," Dr. Graves said carefully, "but all custodians know of Father Moray, the last of the old guard." "Please," Father Moray gestured toward the front pews. "Sit. We have much to discuss, and time, ironically, is short." As they moved forward, Ethan noticed something strange about the church's boundaries. Where the walls met the shadows, reality seemed to blur, as if the structure wasn't entirely solid. "The temporal fracturing is worsening," Father Moray explained, following Ethan's gaze. "Even this sanctuary won't remain stable much longer." They sat in the front pew while Father Moray stood before them, the guide stone still cradled in his hands. Ethan could feel the prime chronostone and stabilizer stone in his pockets responding to its presence, a subtle vibration that seemed to resonate through his bones. "You found me through the connection between the stones," Father Moray said. "As I knew you would, as you were always meant to." "What do you mean, meant to?" Jax asked suspiciously. "Your arrival here was foretold centuries ago. Ethan Carter, the resonant one, bearing two of the triad on the eve of temporal collapse." "Enough riddles," Dr. Graves interjected. "We're here because reality is fracturing. Vincent Holt has synchronized two of the chronostones and is hunting for the third, which you possess. We need to know what we're facing." Father Moray nodded gravely. "The tale begins millennia ago, with a civilization you now call the predecessors." He placed the guide stone on a small altar. "They weren't aliens or gods. They were humans who had evolved beyond current limitations. They understood time not as a river flowing in one direction, but as an ocean with currents that could be navigated, diverted, even dammed. And they created the chronostones," Ethan said. "As tools to manipulate temporal currents, yes, but their hubris led to disaster. Their experiments created cascading paradoxes that threatened to unravel reality itself." Father Moray's expression darkened. In desperation, the ruling faction developed what they called the Unified Chronostone, a device that could reset time to before their fatal errors. "But not just a reset," Dr. Graves added. "A complete rewrite, erasing our timeline and establishing a new one where the predecessors never fell." "Precisely," Father Moray confirmed. "However, a splinter group, scientists and philosophers who believed such an action was cosmically unethical, sabotaged the plan. They separated the unified stone into 3 components and scattered them across time, and they established my order, the custodians of time, to ensure the stones would never be reunited." And Ordo Tenebris? Ethan asked. They are descendants of the ruling faction or believe themselves to be. In truth, Vincent Holt has manipulated their legends for his own purposes. He is something different. What do you mean? Jax asked. Holt is a temporal refugee, a man from a future that no longer exists. He found a chronostone during the collapse of his own civilization and used it to flee backward through time. He has spent centuries trying to restore what he lost, regardless of the cost to our reality. He showed me Samantha, Ethan said, quietly. Trapped in a temporal pocket. Father Moray's gaze softened. Yes, Samantha Quinn. Another piece in Holt's intricate game. He didn't tell you that he was the one who engineered her disappearance. Why? Why Samantha specifically? Because of you, Mr. Carter. You and Ms. Quinn share an extraordinarily rare genetic marker, a legacy from the predecessors themselves. You're both resonant with the chronostones in ways few humans are. When Holt discovered Ms. Quinn investigating strange occurrences in Blackwood Ridge, he recognized what she was. He used a chronostone to remove her from the timeline, knowing that eventually you would come searching. A lure, Jax realized. He used Samantha as bait to draw Ethan to the prime chronostone. A cruel but effective strategy. Father Moray agreed. Holt needed someone with the right genetic makeup to fully activate the prime chronostone. Ethan's hands clenched into fists, rage building within him. So all of this, my 5 years of searching, finding the chronostone, everything, it was all Holt's manipulation? Not entirely. The chronostones have their own awareness. They chose you as much as Holt did, perhaps more so. Father Moray gestured to the prime chronostone in Ethan's pocket. That stone has been waiting for you, Mr. Carter, for someone who could truly understand its purpose. Which is what? Ethan asked. What is the prime chronostone meant to do? It depends on who you ask. Holt believes it's meant to reset reality to the predecessor's vision. The custodians believe it should remain dormant forever. Father Moray smiled enigmatically. I believe it's meant to heal, not destroy. Dr. Graves leaned forward, her expression skeptical. Heal? The chronostones were designed as weapons, tools of power. Tools, yes, but like any tool, their purpose lies in the hand that wields them. Father Moray turned his attention back to Ethan. Which brings us to the choice before you, Mr. Carter. What choice? Ordo Tenebris seeks the Guide Stone to complete the triad and rewrite reality. The custodians would have you destroy all 3 stones, even though that means condemning those lost in temporal displacement, including Ms. Quinn, to eternal exile. Father Moray's gaze was intense. I offer a third option. Use the triad not to rewrite reality, but to repair the fractures in our existing timeline. Is that even possible? Dr. Graves asked, doubt evident in her voice. Theoretically, yes, but it would require someone with an extraordinary connection to the chronostones, someone like Mr. Carter, to navigate to the temporal nexus, the source point where all timelines converge. The source, Ethan said. You're talking about going to the place where the chronostones were created? Yes. There, at the heart of the temporal network, the system could be reprogrammed, set to restore stability to our timeline rather than replace it. And Samantha? Ethan asked. The others trapped in temporal displacement? They could be restored to their proper places in time. Father Moray's expression grew serious. But there is a cost, Mr. Carter, a terrible cost. What cost? Jax asked, his protective instinct evident in his tone. To reach the nexus, Ethan must willingly disconnect from this timeline entirely, becoming a temporal ghost, with no anchor in any specific moment of history. If he succeeds, all may be restored. If he fails, he'll be lost between times forever, Dr. Graves finished, her voice hollow. Eternally adrift in the void between moments. Silence fell over the church, broken only by the subtle sounds of reality shifting beyond its walls. The swirling colors in the sky outside had darkened, and the temporal flickers at the edges of the structure were becoming more frequent, more violent. How long do we have? Ethan finally asked. Before time fractures completely? Hours, perhaps, Father Moray replied. "A day at most. The process is accelerating." "And Holt? He'll be coming for the guidestone." "Vincent Holt has waited centuries for this moment. He can wait a little longer." Father Moray's expression softened with sympathy. "But yes, he will come. He knows the stones are together now." Ethan took a deep breath, his decision crystallizing with sudden clarity. "I'll do it. I'll try to reach the nexus." "Ethan, no," Jax protested. "There has to be another way. If there is, we don't have time to find it." Ethan placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. "And I won't let Samantha remain trapped forever, or worse, erased from existence entirely." "Then I'm coming with you," Jax insisted. "That's not possible," Father Moray said regretfully. "Only one with Ethan's unique connection to the chronostones can survive the journey. So you're sending my brother alone into some kind of time vortex on the word of a priest we just met?" Jax's voice rose with anger. "Faith is all I can offer you, Mr. Carter. Faith in the evidence of your own experiences these past hours." Jax looked like he wanted to argue further, but Ethan squeezed his shoulder. "It's okay, Jax, I have to try." As Ethan stepped forward, something strange happened. For a moment, he thought he heard Samantha's voice, felt her touch on his arm, but there was no one there, just air. "What was that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "A temporal echo," Father Moray explained. "As the boundaries between moments thin, echoes slip through. Ms. Quinn's consciousness reached for you, however briefly. She's aware? She knows what's happening?" "On some level, yes. Those in temporal stasis experience moments of clarity. Windows through which they can briefly perceive the world beyond their prison." The revelation steeled Ethan's resolve. "Then she knows I'm coming for her." Father Moray nodded and held out the guidestone, its light casting an emerald glow across the altar. "Take it," he instructed. "Hold it in both hands and focus your thoughts on the source, the beginning of all times, the place where the predecessors first wove the fabric of temporal manipulation." Ethan accepted the chronostone, its weight surprisingly light in his palms. The surface was warm, the symbols shifting and flowing like liquid beneath the surface. "What will I see?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "That," Father Moray replied softly, "I cannot tell you. No custodian has ever attempted what you are about to undertake." Ethan nodded, taking a deep breath. He closed his eyes, focusing his thoughts as instructed. At first, nothing happened. Then it began. Not the violent, disorienting temporal shifts he had experienced before, but something both gentler and more profound. The world didn't so much vanish as dissolve, reality itself becoming transparent around him. He opened his eyes to find himself still standing before the altar, but the church, and everyone in it, had become ghostly, translucent. And beyond them, through the walls that no longer presented a barrier to his perception, Ethan could see everything. Past, present, future, all times existing simultaneously, layered upon each other like pages in a book. And between those, layers connecting them, flowed golden threads of light, pathways through the fabric of time itself. The chronostone in his hands pulsed, drawing his attention to one particular thread that shimmered with greater brightness. It led away from the church, stretching into the infinite distance toward a point of brilliant light, the temporal nexus. With a last look at his brother and Dr. Graves, now frozen in time from his perspective, Ethan stepped onto the golden path and let it carry him forward. Into the unknown, into the heart of time itself. Time had no meaning on the golden path. Ethan floated through a kaleidoscopic void where past, present, and future existed simultaneously. The guidestone pulsed in his hand, its emerald light, creating a protective bubble around him in the temporal chaos. Everywhere he looked, fragments of reality played out like scenes on countless overlapping screens. Dinosaurs roaming prehistoric landscapes, ancient civilizations rising and falling, modern cities teeming with life, strange futures where humanity had evolved beyond recognition. Eventually, he felt the path begin to solidify beneath his feet. The kaleidoscopic fragments coalesced into a single, coherent reality. He stood on a hill overlooking a vast city unlike anything he had ever seen. Buildings of impossible geometry rose into a sky streaked with auroras despite the midday sun. The structures shifted subtly when viewed from different angles, as if they existed partially in other dimensions. At the city's center stood a massive tower of crystal and light, pulsing with the same energy as the chronostones. The Nexus, Ethan whispered, somehow knowing this was his destination. He began descending the hill toward the city, the guide stone growing warmer in his hand. As he approached the outskirts, he noticed something strange. There were no people. The city hummed with energy and purpose. Machines moved along predetermined paths, but no citizens walked its gleaming streets. The absence was eerie, unnatural. This was clearly the height of the predecessor civilization, not its ruins. So where was everyone? Ethan moved cautiously through the empty streets, guided by the chronostone's insistent pull toward the central tower. At the base of the crystal tower, he found his answer. A circular plaza stretched before the tower entrance, filled with hundreds of stone sarcophagi. Each bore the engraved image of a humanoid figure, too tall and thin to be human, with elongated craniums and six-fingered hands. "The last of the predecessors," came a familiar voice from behind him. Ethan spun around to find Vincent Holt standing at the edge of the plaza. But this wasn't the Holt he had met in the ravine. This Holt appeared, older, more weathered, with a network of fine scars across his face and a mechanical device where his right eye should have been. "How are you here?" Ethan demanded. Holt smiled thinly. "I've been here many times, Mr. Carter. The chronostones allow those with the right bloodline to visit key moments in the timeline. This moment, the predecessor Exodus, is perhaps the most significant of all." "Exodus?" Holt gestured to the sarcophagi. "They're not dead, merely waiting. Their consciousnesses were uploaded into the temporal network itself, ready to be reborn when the chronostones reset the timeline. They put themselves in stasis to survive the cataclysm they created," Ethan realized. "Precisely." Holt approached, his mechanical eye whirring as it focused on Ethan. But not all of them. A few chose a different path, to scatter through time itself, hiding in human bloodlines, passing down their genetic legacy until the moment was right to reunite the triad and awaken their brethren. "And you think you're one of those descendants?" "I know I am, as are you, though your lineage is unexpected." Holt's expression darkened. "A complication in my plans." "Your plans?" Ethan's hand tightened around the guide stone. "You've been manipulating everything from the beginning, haven't you? Samantha's disappearance, my discovery of the chronostone. None of it was accidental." Holt chuckled. "Time isn't linear, Mr. Carter. Not for those who know how to navigate it. I've spent lifetimes arranging the pieces of this particular puzzle." "Why? Why go to all this trouble? Why involve Samantha or me?" "Because the triad can only be activated by someone with the right genetic signature. Samantha was simply bait. I knew you would never stop looking for her, and when the time was right, your grief and determination would lead you exactly where I needed you to go." Rage flooded through Ethan. "You ruined our lives, all for some psychotic plan to rewrite history?" "Not rewrite, restore." Holt gestured to the silent city around them. "This is humanity's rightful inheritance, a civilization that conquered time itself, free from disease, suffering, and death." "Except for the part where they nearly destroyed reality," Ethan countered. "A minor setback." Holt's mechanical eye focused on the guide stone in Ethan's hand. "That's why you're here, isn't it? Hoping to find a way to stop the process? Let me guess. Father Moray sent you to find the source, to reprogram the triad?" "There is no reprogramming the triad, Mr. Carter. It does what it was designed to restore the predecessor timeline at the expense of our own." "Then I'll destroy it," Ethan said with sudden conviction. "You can't. The system is self-sustaining, spread across thousands of years and hundreds of locations." Holt spread his hands. "The only choice now is whether you want to be part of what comes after." "What are you talking about?" "Join me." Holt's voice softened, becoming almost hypnotic. With your connection to the chronostones and my knowledge of the predecessor's technology, we could position ourselves as leaders in the new timeline. Not merely pawns in their game, but architects of the future. And everyone else? Samantha, Jax, Dr. Graves, everyone in our world? Some may persist as echoes in the new timeline, if their genetic makeup is compatible. The rest? Holt shrugged. Evolution has always required sacrifice. You're insane. I'm practical. And I've seen enough of time to know that resistance is pointless. Holt held out his hand. Give me the guide stone, Ethan. Together we can ensure our place in what comes next. Never. Holt sighed. Then I'll take it. He lunged forward with inhuman speed, his hand closing around Ethan's wrist in a grip of iron. The guide stone pulsed violently between them, its light intensifying until Ethan had to close his eyes against the glare. When he opened them again, the plaza had vanished. They stood inside the crystal tower, a vast open space filled with concentric rings of what appeared to be control stations. At the center, a column of pure energy rose from floor to ceiling, pulsing with the same rhythm as the chronostones. The temporal nexus, Holt said, releasing Ethan's wrist. The control center for the entire network. This is where it began, and where it will end. Ethan staggered back, the guide stone still clutched in his hand. Around the central column, holographic displays flickered with symbols identical to those on the chronostones. How did we? The guide stone responds to intent, Holt explained. And right now, both our intents align on the nexus, though for different purposes. He moved toward one of the control stations, his fingers dancing over symbols that lit up at his touch. The final countdown has already begun in your time. The blue chronostone is building toward critical mass. All three stones are now active and connected across time. And Samantha? Still trapped in her moment, waiting to be either restored or erased? Holt's hands paused over the controls. Her fate, everyone's fate, depends on what happens here. A voice echoed suddenly through the chamber, familiar, impossible. He's lying, Ethan. Ethan spun around to see Father Moray standing by the entrance to the chamber, but not the elderly priest he had met in the church. This Moray was younger, stronger, dressed in robes that matched the architectural style of the predecessor city. I've always been here, Moray replied to Ethan's stunned expression. I am the last true predecessor, not a descendant, but one of the original architects of the temporal network. Holt's face contorted with rage. Liar! The predecessors uploaded themselves into the network. Most did, Moray acknowledged. Those who believed the timeline could and should be rewritten to erase their mistakes. I chose a different path, to live through time linearly, to experience humanity's journey without interference. As a priest, Ethan realized, you founded the custodians, to guard against exactly this moment. Moray stepped further into the chamber. Vincent Holt is not what he claims to be. He is not a predecessor descendant. He is a temporal anomaly, a parasite who has learned to manipulate the chronostones for his own ends. There will be no new order, Moray said firmly. Only obliteration. The temporal network was never designed to reset time. That was a lie told to convince my people to upload themselves. In reality, the system is flawed. Activation won't create a new timeline. It will destroy all timelines simultaneously. Why would they do that? Ethan asked. Because they believed if they couldn't rule time, no one should. Moray's expression was grim, a final act of cosmic spite. Holt abandoned the control panel, his mechanical eye whirring frantically. No, I've spent centuries preparing for the new timeline. There never was going to be a new timeline, Moray said. Only an end to all timelines. Ethan's mind raced. Then how do we stop it? We can't stop the activation. It's already begun. But we can redirect it. Moray approached the central column of energy. The triad isn't just a key. It's a focus. With the right configuration, we can use its power to stabilize our timeline rather than destroy it. And the people lost in time, Samantha, If we succeed, everyone will be restored to their proper place in the timeline. If we fail, Morey didn't need to finish the thought. No. Holt lunged for Morey, but he was too late. The priest had already reached the central column and placed his hands directly into the energy field. His body convulsed as power surged through him. But he remained standing, his voice strained but determined. "The guidestone, Ethan. Place it in the field, quickly." Ethan moved toward the column, but Holt tackled him from behind. They crashed to the floor, the chronostone flying from Ethan's grasp and skittering across the smooth surface. "I won't let you ruin everything," Holt shouted, his face twisted with rage. Centuries of planning, of manipulation, all for nothing. They struggled on the floor, Holt's enhanced strength giving him the advantage. His hands closed around Ethan's throat, squeezing with inhuman force. "If time is ending," Holt snarled, "then you'll die first." Black spots danced at the edges of Ethan's vision as he fought for breath. In desperation, he brought his knee up sharply, connecting with Holt's solar plexus. The man's grip loosened just enough for Ethan to break free and scramble toward the chronostone. His fingers closed around it just as Holt recovered. The man launched himself forward again, but this time, Ethan was ready. He rolled aside at the last moment, sending Holt careening into the central energy column. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. The energy surged around him, lifting him off the ground. His body began to disintegrate, breaking apart into fragments that scattered through the time field. "What's happening to him?" Ethan shouted over the building roar of energy. "Temporal dissolution," Morey called back, still maintaining his position at the column. "His physical form is being distributed across all moments simultaneously, the ultimate death for a being that has cheated time for so long." Holt's screams faded as the last of his body dissolved into the energy field. The column pulsed violently, the entire chamber shaking with power on the verge of collapse. "Now, Ethan," Morey urged. "The stone." With a final look at the spot where Holt had vanished, Ethan stepped forward and thrust the guidestone into the energy column beside Morey's hands. The world exploded into light. Light engulfed Ethan, blinding and all-consuming. He felt his consciousness expanding exponentially, stretching across the fabric of time itself. The boundaries of his self dissolved as his awareness spread outward, encompassing millennia in a single moment. He could see everything: the birth of stars, the rise and fall of civilizations, the intricate web of cause and effect that formed the tapestry of existence. And he could see the damage, fractures in reality spreading outward from the activated chronostones, threatening to shatter time itself. "Focus, Ethan." Father Morey's voice came from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. "Your consciousness is merging with the temporal network. Don't let it overwhelm you." Ethan struggled to maintain a sense of identity amid the flood of information. His mind threatened to fragment under the strain. "Remember why you're here," Morey urged. "Remember, Samantha." The name anchored him, pulling his scattered awareness back toward a central point. He focused on her, not just the Samantha he had known, but all versions of her across all possible timelines. And he saw what had truly happened 5 years ago. She hadn't accidentally stumbled upon a chronostone as he had. Holt had orchestrated her disappearance meticulously. He'd manipulated events to lead her to Blackwood Ridge, and when she discovered the truth about Ordo Tenebris, he'd used a chronostone to remove her from the timeline, not killing her, but suspending her in a temporal stasis field, a prison outside of normal time. He's kept her there for 5 years, Ethan realized. Conscious but unable to move forward or back in time, trapped in a single moment of realization. "Yes," Morey confirmed. One of many cruelties Holt inflicted in his obsessive quest. As Ethan's expanded awareness settled, he began to perceive the structure of the temporal network itself, a vast, intricate system of interconnected nodes and pathways spanning all of existence. The chronostones were merely access points, interfaces, that allowed interaction with this underlying framework. And at the heart of it all was the temporal nexus, where they now existed as patterns of energy, rather than physical beings. I can see the programming, Ethan said, perceiving the complex patterns of energy that governed the network. It's like code, but written in time itself. My colleague's final act of spite, Moray explained, his presence a steadying force in the chaos. When they realized their civilization was doomed, they designed the triad to unravel all of reality rather than allow another timeline to supplant theirs. Can it be changed? That's why you're here. Your unique connection to the chronostones gives you access to the deepest levels of the system. But we must act quickly, the collapse has already begun. Ethan could see it clearly now, reality fracturing along temporal fault lines, moments disconnecting from the flow of time, entire sections of history becoming unstable. And at the epicenter of it all was Blackwood Ridge, where the prime chronostone had first activated. He focused his awareness there and saw Jax and Dr. Graves in the small stone church, watching in horror as reality disintegrated around them. The walls of the sanctuary were barely holding back the chaos, a swirling maelstrom of temporal energy that consumed everything it touched, erasing it from existence. How do I stop it? Ethan asked. Not stop, redirect, Moray corrected. The energy release can't be halted now, but it can be channeled toward restoration rather than destruction. Under Moray's guidance, Ethan reached into the heart of the system, his consciousness interfacing directly with the temporal network. The programming was alien, designed by minds that perceived reality fundamentally differently than humans, but as his awareness expanded, he began to understand its patterns, its logic. There, Moray directed, highlighting a critical node in the network. This is the primary directive, the command to unravel all timelines simultaneously. It needs to be reconfigured. Ethan focused his will on the node, attempting to alter its fundamental purpose. But the system resisted, pushing back against his efforts with increasing force. It's fighting me, he gasped, the strain threatening to fragment his consciousness again. The system has safeguards, Moray explained. It was designed to resist tampering. Then what do? We need to create a new directive, one that uses the released energy to heal the fractured timelines rather than destroy them. As Ethan gathered his will, he felt a presence stirring, the uploaded consciousnesses of the predecessors, awakening from their long dormancy as the system activated. They became aware of his intrusion, his attempt to subvert their final vengeance against time itself. They pushed back, their combined will a crushing force against his mind. Ethan felt himself beginning to dissolve, his identity scattering under their assault. They're too strong, he cried out. There are too many of them. You're not alone, Moray assured him, his presence strengthening beside Ethan's. The void around them shifted, and new presences joined them, thousands of human minds, each a small point of light in the darkness. Temporal exiles, people who had been displaced from the timeline over millennia. Among them, shining brighter than the rest, was Samantha. Ethan? Her voice cut through the chaos, clear and strong. Is that really you? Sam, he called back, his fragmented consciousness coalescing around the sound of her voice. I've been looking for you for so long. I know. I felt you searching, but I couldn't reach back until now. The predecessor's assault intensified, threatening to overwhelm them all. But with each passing moment, more temporal exiles joined the resistance, their combined consciousness pushing back against the ancient minds. We need to hurry, Moray urged. Reality is collapsing. We won't get another chance. With Samantha's presence anchoring him, Ethan drove deeper into the system, past the predecessor's defenses to the core directive that governed the entire network. There, in patterns of energy that defied human comprehension, he found what they were looking for, the heart of the Doomsday Protocol. There, he said. I can see it. Can you change it? Moray asked, his presence flickering as he struggled to hold back the predecessor's assault. Ethan studied the complex patterns, seeking a weakness, a way to redirect the energy rather than stop it. The solution came to him not in words or images but in pure understanding. A reconfiguration of the system's fundamental purpose. Not change, he realized. Replace. With a surge of will, Ethan poured his consciousness into the heart of the system, overriding the destructive directive with a new purpose: restoration. The energy released by the chronostones wouldn't unravel time. It would repair it, knitting together the fractured moments, restoring the lost and displaced to their proper places in the timeline. The predecessors fought desperately against the change, their ancient minds raging against this final defeat. But they had been dormant too long, while Ethan's will was strengthened by something they couldn't comprehend. Not just determination, but love. Love for Samantha, for Jax, for the world he was fighting to save. "It's working," Samantha called, her presence growing stronger as the system began to shift. The temporal network shuddered as its purpose was rewritten. The destructive energy that had been building for millennia reversed direction, flowing back into the fractures it had created, healing rather than harming. But the strain on Ethan's consciousness was becoming unbearable. As the system reconfigured, he felt himself stretching thinner, his identity dissolving as his awareness spread across all of time simultaneously. "I can't hold on," he gasped. "I'm losing myself." "You need an anchor," Morey said urgently. "Something to tether your consciousness to a specific point in the timeline." "Ethan, focus on me," Samantha called. "On us. On the moment we first met." Ethan reached for the memory. A coffee shop 5 years ago, a spilled drink, an apology, her smile as she accepted his offer of a replacement. Such a small moment, yet it had changed everything that followed. As he focused on that single point in time, the endless expansion of his consciousness began to slow. The memory acted as a gravity well, pulling his scattered awareness back toward a central point: his identity, his self. The temporal network continued its reconfiguration, the healing process spreading outward from the nexus in waves of restorative energy. The fractures began to close, reality stabilizing as moments reconnected to the proper flow of time. "The exiles," Ethan said, becoming aware of the thousands of displaced consciousnesses still adrift in the void. "What happens to them? To Samantha?" "They'll be restored to their proper places in the timeline," Morey explained. "Returned to the exact moments they were taken from." "But they'll remember what happened? The years they spent trapped?" "No. For them, it will be as if no time has passed. The memory of their displacement will fade like a dream upon waking." Ethan felt a pang of loss. Samantha would return to the moment before she disappeared, before they had shared this connection across time itself. She wouldn't remember his search for her, his journey to the heart of the temporal network. To her, it would never have happened. "It's the only way," Morey said gently, sensing his thoughts. "The human mind isn't designed to contain such experiences." "And what about me?" Ethan asked. "Will I remember?" "That will be your burden to bear, I'm afraid. Your connection to the chronostones has permanently altered your perception of time. You will remember everything." The restoration was nearly complete now, reality reknitting itself across all of history. The predecessors' consciousnesses were fading, their last vengeful effort defeated by the very species they had sought to erase. "It's time for you to return," Morey said. "The network is stable now. It will complete the healing process on its own." "What about you?" Ethan asked. "My journey through time is nearly complete," Morey replied, his presence growing fainter. "I've lived far longer than any being should. It's time for me to rest." "Thank you," Ethan said. "No, Ethan Carter. Thank you. You've accomplished what I could not. You've healed time itself." Morey's presence faded entirely, merging with the temporal network he had helped create millennia ago. As he vanished, Ethan felt the system's pull, drawing him back toward his proper place in the timeline. "Ethan?" Samantha called, her voice growing distant as she too was pulled back to her moment. "Will I see you again?" "Yes," he promised. though he knew she wouldn't remember this exchange. "I'll find you, Sam. I always do." Her presence faded, along with the thousands of other exiles, each returning to their proper place in the restored timeline. Ethan felt himself being drawn back as well, his expanded consciousness condensing once more into human form. As reality reformed around him, one final vision flashed through his mind, a glimpse of what awaited him in the restored timeline. He saw Blackwood Ridge, the guardian oak standing tall and ancient. He saw himself there, and Samantha beside him, both of them unaware of the journey they had taken across time itself. Then this too faded, and Ethan Carter surrendered to the pull of time, letting it carry him back to where and when he belonged. The light faded. Time flowed forward once more. Echoes of the Forgotten. Part 8. The Echo's Choice. The hawk circled lazily over Blackwood Ridge, riding the warm updrafts of a perfect autumn day. Below, the forest stretched in vibrant shades of red and gold, disturbed only by a solitary figure making his way along a narrow trail. Ethan Carter paused to check his bearings, the familiar weight of his camera hanging from his neck. He'd been hiking since dawn, following coordinates that had appeared in his dreams for weeks. Dreams of ancient ruins, glowing stones, and a woman with eyes he couldn't forget. The path widened, opening into a clearing dominated by a massive oak tree. Its roots erupted from the earth like writhing serpents, creating natural alcoves and hollows. He recognized it immediately, though he couldn't explain how. The guardian oak. He'd never been here before, and yet he had, many times, in many timelines. Ethan blinked, shaking his head to clear the strange thought. What did that even mean? Timelines? He must be more tired than he realized. He sat down, his camera bag, and approached the tree, drawn by an inexplicable certainty that he'd find something important here. As he neared the gnarled trunk, his heart began to race. Between two massive roots, barely visible beneath a thin layer of soil, was a familiar glint of metal. Ethan froze, a flood of memories washing over him. Memories that shouldn't exist. Finding the chronostone, the visions, Dr. Graves, Jax's cabin, the borderlands, Father Moray, the temporal nexus, Samantha. He remembered everything. The journey, through fractured time, the battle at the heart of the temporal network, redirecting the energy of the chronostones to heal reality rather than destroy it. But that couldn't be right. None of that had happened. Had it? With trembling hands, he crouched and brushed away the soil, revealing the edge of a metallic disc. The chronostone, the prime chronostone, exactly as he remembered it. As his fingers hovered above its surface, he hesitated, torn between the urge to touch it and the fear of what might happen if he did. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," came a voice from behind him. "At least, not without knowing what you're getting into." Ethan turned to find a woman standing at the edge of the clearing. She wore hiking boots, jeans, and a red flannel shirt with frayed cuffs. A small scar marked the skin above her right eyebrow. "Samantha," he whispered, the name coming unbidden to his lips. Her eyes widened slightly. Surprise, confusion, recognition, flashing across her face in quick succession. "Do I know you?" Ethan stood, his mind racing. She didn't remember. Moray had warned him that the exile's memories would fade like dreams upon waking. To Samantha, their shared journey through time had never happened. She was experiencing this moment, finding the chronostone beneath the guardian oak for the first time. "No," he said carefully. "I don't think we've met. I'm Ethan Carter." "Samantha Quinn," she replied, approaching cautiously. "Mind if I ask what you're doing out here? This area isn't exactly on the regular hiking trails." "I'm a wildlife photographer," he explained, gesturing to his camera. "I was hoping to get shots of the northern goshawk that's been spotted in this region." "Funny coincidence," she said, though her tone suggested she didn't believe in coincidences. "I'm here doing research for an article. Local legends, strange disappearances, that sort of thing." Just as she had been 5 years ago, in the original timeline. before Holt had trapped her in temporal stasis, before Ethan had spent 5 years searching for her, before he'd found the chronostone himself and unraveled the conspiracy across time. "The guardian oak," he said, nodding toward the massive tree. "It features in some of those legends, doesn't it?" Surprise flickered across her face. "Yes, actually. How did you know that?" "I've heard stories." Ethan struggled to keep his composure. Standing before him was the woman he'd journeyed across time to save, yet to her, he was a complete stranger. Something about objects being found beneath it. Objects that aren't quite normal. Samantha's expression shifted from curiosity to suspicion. "You seem to know a lot for someone who's just here to photograph birds. Would you believe me if I said I knew what you were going to find buried beneath this tree?" Ethan asked, the words escaping before he could stop them. "A metallic disc, with symbols that seem to move when you're not looking directly at them." She took a step back. "Who are you, really? How do you know about that?" "It's complicated." Ethan glanced down at the partially uncovered chronostone, its surface still inert. "And you probably wouldn't believe me if I told you." "Try me," she challenged. "I'm researching unexplained phenomena for a reason. I've got a pretty open mind." Ethan took a deep breath. What could he say? That in another timeline they'd been engaged? That she'd disappeared for 5 years while he searched desperately for her? That they'd battled together at the heart of time itself to save reality from unraveling? "That disc," he said instead, pointing to the chronostone, "is called a chronostone. It's dangerous. If you touch it, it will show you things, places, times, people that you shouldn't be able to see. And it will draw attention from people who've been searching for it for a very long time." "People like you?" Samantha asked, her journalist's instincts clearly on high alert. "No, people like Ordo Tenebris." The name sparked something in her eyes, recognition, alarm. "How do you know that name? You've heard of them?" She hesitated, then nodded. "In my research, whispers, rumors, a secretive organization supposedly connected to the disappearances I'm investigating." She studied him with renewed intensity. "But very few people know that name, so I'll ask again. Who are you, Ethan Carter?" Before he could answer, a distant sound reached them, the low rumble of vehicles approaching on the forest road. "They're coming," Ethan said, suddenly alert. "We need to go. Now." "Who's coming?" "Ordo Tenebris. They can sense when the chronostone is about to be activated." He gestured urgently away from the clearing. "There's a ranger station about 2 miles north. If we hurry, we can reach it before they find us." Samantha didn't move. "Why should I trust you?" Ethan met her gaze directly. "Because right now, I'm the only person in the world who knows exactly what that disc is capable of, and how to keep it from falling into the wrong hands." Something in his expression must have convinced her, because after a moment's hesitation, she nodded. "All right, but I want answers. Real ones." "You'll get them," he promised. "But first, we need to get somewhere safe." As they turned to leave, Ethan paused, looking back at the partially uncovered chronostone. He couldn't leave it here for Ordo Tenebris to find, but touching it might trigger another temporal event, and he wasn't sure what would happen now that reality had been restored. "We need to take it with us," Samantha said, following his gaze, "and don't we?" "Yes," Ethan agreed reluctantly, "but we need to be careful, very careful." He removed a microfiber cloth from his camera bag and used it to lift the chronostone without making direct contact. As he wrapped it securely, he felt its energy pulsing subtly, responding to his proximity. It recognized him, even if Samantha didn't. "Let's go," he said, slipping the wrapped disc into his bag. They moved quickly through the forest, following game trails away from the main path. The sound of vehicles had stopped. Ordo Tenebris had arrived at the trailhead and would be deploying search teams. "You still haven't explained how you know all this," Samantha said as they hiked. "Or why you were at the Guardian Oak the exact same time I was." "Would you believe me if I said I've lived through this day before?" Ethan asked. "In what? Like a time loop? Groundhog Day situation?" "Not exactly." Ethan paused, considering how much to reveal. More like, I've seen what happens if certain choices are made. If you find that disc, touch it. Try to uncover the truth about Ordo Tenebris alone. And what happens? She pressed. You disappear, he said simply. For 5 years, trapped in a moment outside of time, and I spend those years searching for you, only to eventually find myself in the same situation, finding the chronostone, experiencing visions, being hunted by the same people hunting you now. Samantha studied his face, looking for signs of deception or delusion. Finding neither, she asked, and how does it end? This story you've supposedly lived through? With a choice. At the heart of time itself. A choice between destroying everything to save a few, or finding another way. A way to heal rather than harm. They walked in silence for several minutes. The only sounds their footfalls on the forest floor and the occasional call of birds overhead. Finally, Samantha spoke again. Let's say I believe you, which I'm not saying I do, but let's pretend. What's different this time? Why are you here now before I found the disc? I don't know, Ethan admitted. When we restored the timeline, everyone was supposed to return to their proper places, their proper moments. The exiles wouldn't remember what happened during their displacement, but I remember everything, and somehow I'm here now instead of 5 years from now when I originally found the chronostone. Maybe that's your reward, Samantha suggested, for saving time or reality or whatever it was you saved. A chance to prevent the bad stuff from happening in the first place. Maybe, Ethan agreed thoughtfully. Or maybe it's a test. A test? To see if I've truly learned from what happened. If I'll make the same mistakes or different ones. They crested a ridge and the forest opened up before them, stretching toward distant mountains. No sign of pursuit yet, but Ethan knew Ordo Tenebris wouldn't give up easily. They never had. So what now? Samantha asked. Assuming any of this is real, what's our next move? We find someone who can help us, Ethan said. Someone who understands the chronostones better than anyone. And who would that be? Dr. Lillian Graves. She's a professor of historical linguistics at the university and a member of an ancient order called the Custodians of Time. Samantha's eyebrows rose. Custodians of Time? Seriously? I know how it sounds, but she's our best chance of keeping the chronostone safe until we figure out what to do with it. They continued their trek through the forest, both lost in thought. After a while, Samantha broke the silence again. In this other timeline, you said we were, what? Friends? More than that, Ethan admitted. We were engaged. Engaged? Samantha laughed, the sound bright and unexpected in the quiet forest. To someone I just met? That doesn't sound like me at all. We didn't just meet. Not there. Ethan smiled despite himself. We met in a coffee shop. I spilled your drink, bought you a new one. We talked for hours. About what? Everything. Your work as a journalist, my photography, books, movies, places we wanted to travel someday. And then what? We fell madly in love and got engaged. Not right away. It took time. A year of friendship first, then dating, then living together. The proposal happened on a camping trip under the stars. You said that this was the perfect setting because you'd always promised to give me the stars. Samantha finished in a whisper. Ethan stopped walking and turned to her, shock evident on his face. How did you know that? Samantha looked equally surprised, her hand rising unconsciously to touch the small scar above her eyebrow. I don't know. It just came out. Like a line from a dream I can't quite remember. Moray said the memories would fade like dreams, Ethan said, hope kindling in his chest. But maybe they're not gone completely. Maybe they're just buried, waiting to be remembered. I don't know what that means, Samantha said, confusion and frustration mingling in her voice. I don't know you. I've never met you before today, and yet there's something familiar about you, about this whole situation. She shook her head. It doesn't make any sense. Time rarely does, Ethan said softly. A hawk's cry pierced the air above them. They both looked, up to see the bird circling lazily in the clear blue sky, its wings catching the golden afternoon sunlight. "We should keep moving," Ethan said, reluctantly breaking the moment. "The ranger station isn't far now." As they resumed their trek, walking side by side through the autumn forest, Ethan felt a strange sense of both déjà vu and newness. This wasn't how it had happened before, and yet in some fundamental way perhaps it was. Time wasn't a straight line or even a circle. It was a tapestry of interconnected moments, constantly being rewoven, and maybe, just maybe, this time the pattern would be different. Better. Above them, the hawk continued its circular flight, a silent witness to possibilities unfolding below. One journey had ended, another had just begun. Time, after all, was full of echoes and second chances. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.